Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, Scaling IGA to cover the whole enterprise. My name is Kent Purdy, and I'll be hosting today's event. And with me here, I have Jim Montgomery from TriVir. Hi, Jim.
Hey, Kent.
So Jim is an identity management consultant and has been one for this past decade. Before that, he was a solution architect for 7 years, specializing in enterprise directory services, overseeing all types of projects having to do with identity and access management. And before that, for 9 years, Jim did all sorts of network administration roles. So Jim has a long pedigree in the space, and I'm really grateful that he's agreed to come online. Next to the chat button, you'll see the Q&A button, which I'm going to ask you to use to ask your questions. Please do so during the webinar, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. There's lots of text on some of these slides, so you may want to maximize your Zoom view so you can get a good view. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be available later for on-demand consumption. And we're going to provide a PDF of the slides as well. So with all that housekeeping, Jim, I'm going to hand it off to you.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Kent. Everybody, thanks for joining. My name is Jim Montgomery. It's always good to talk with Kent on a Tuesday morning. We're going to get started. We're going to dive right in. And I want you to sit back in your chair. Imagine that you're sitting at your desk with your coffee in hand or other beverage of choice. And imagine that you've just finished an identity governance deployment for your entire enterprise that covers all of your applications. So what does that even look like? And in fact, what does that even mean? Let's begin with the end in mind. And we're going to think about what the ideal perfect outcome is that we're shooting for. So let's agree on what those goals are of what that would even look like. And then we're going to discuss how to achieve them. So to talk about these goals, we're going to talk about the problems that we're trying to solve and the problems that IG resolves for you and for the organization. So number one, the business has some needs, right? Every business that's trying to deploy governance is going to have certain needs that they're trying to overcome. Number one, they want to pass audits. That's probably the number one thing that we hear about when somebody says, hey, I want to do a governance program. It's because they need to pass audits. They've had audit findings in the past. They need to resolve those in a regular, standard, normal way. They want to improve their security footprint for whatever reason. Or maybe they need to increase their insurance or improve their risk avoidance so that some type of security event doesn't occur. These are all business needs. And I'll note here that 0% of governance projects should start with the IT group. Governance programs and projects should always start with the business and what the business needs are. So other problems that we will find as we start working through a governance program is that, number one, the amount of data that you review will be overwhelming. You have more access in place than you think. So the amount of data that you have is just tremendous. There are going to be, it's very likely you have several either unclear or not even written policies and processes that talk about how to govern your data in your applications. And that's a problem for the people that own those applications. And then lastly, another big problem is that we've seen in lots of environments is changes back to your environment as a result of a review, like when somebody chooses to either keep or remove access, changes back to the environment to implement those decisions don't always happen. Sometimes they're missed. So we're going to talk through these problems today. This is part of understanding what we're trying to solve is an important part of understanding how we're going to fix it. So we're going to talk about an organization. And Kent, I'll let you lay out who the players are, who the recruits are.
The recruits. Yes, of course, we have the CTO, but we also have the Directory of Identity Operations. And in our example that you're going to work through, she's the one that forms a team. She's the one that selects the IGA product manager, who will be the IGA team lead and will own the servers that this group sets up for the business. We also have a couple of managers. We have the compliance manager that's going to play a key role in defining the service that we must do to enable the business. And we have the manager over systems integration who play a key role in connecting the apps to the tool. And then, of course, we have the business app owners. And each one of those has the responsibility to complete the governance process and is the consumer of the service, which means they really do need to buy into the program, and they got to be educated on how it all works.
Yep, excellent. And so I want to point out that there's a certain mindset that we're going from, that we're starting with at the beginning of this project, right? And that mindset is that this team of individuals are going to create a service that the business is going to consume. These individuals are not doing all the work of governance in the organization. They're merely creating something that application owners are going to be consumed, so that application owners are then enabled to perform their own governance. This is a key tenet of how we're going to scale for the entire enterprise. You will never scale if one group owns governance inside your organization, right? You cannot bottleneck the success of your organization's governance program through one group. So you have to be able to leverage other components inside your organization. And this service is going to provide that mechanism by which the governance process will work, and this mechanism through which the business is going to be able to consume this. Something else I want to point out about this team, you don't see it in these pictures. Maybe you see it if you look closely in their eyes. This team has 3 key characteristics that you need on your team. The first is this team has talent. Somewhere on this team, there are people that can figure out what needs to happen in order to achieve their goals. You need to have that on your team. Second thing they have is discipline. Discipline is where the team will stick to their plans and follow through on its progress, regardless of what happens, right? You have to stay disciplined. You have to control your scope. You have to make sure that you're focused on what you need to do next. So somebody on this team is disciplined to help ensure that happens. Lastly, this team has commitment. They're committed to succeeding. They're going to keep going until the job is done. Even when it seems a struggle, they're going to keep going. If you have those 3 characteristics on your team, on your program team, you're going to succeed.
I'm just glad, Jim, in your example, that they don't have fear in their eyes.
Yeah, there's no fear. Well, maybe a little fear is valuable, perhaps, but ultimately they're driven by those other characteristics. Kent, walk us through who the key sponsors are, please.
Yes, okay. So in this example, the VP of Information Technology has responsibility for all the applications managed by the IT organization. Her team performs the audit work, which is very, very expensive. The VP of IT Compliance, his team spends all their time assisting the IT organization. They want to leverage tools that they need to help streamline the reviews themselves. And they also need to help make all these complex standards more clear to everyone involved.
Excellent. So those are the folks that are getting the benefit of our program and the service we're going to create, this governance service. So what I'm showing you here is a initial project plan. What we're going to do over the next several minutes is we're going to talk about an evolution of this project plan, and you will see how this develops over time as you get more insight into a governance program. And the idea here is that our CTO, who you saw on a previous slide, they have a requirement from the board of directors to address audit findings, right? This is something that's extremely common that we see all the time with our clients. In order to continue doing business, they need to address these audit findings so that they're allowed to continue to hold contracts with their main customer. They need to improve their audit results. So the CTO has charged that director of identity operations to deploy this new piece of software that they purchased. They went through software selection, they've chosen something, and they said, this is the thing that's going to make it work for us. And it's up to that director to make that happen. So this initial project plan is a very high level thought about, like, okay, great, what's it going to take to get governance in place? How do we start using it? Step 1, you set up servers to get the tool installed. That is the first thing any IT person normally thinks about. Is like, oh, well, I need servers to run this. Step 2, we're going to onboard a few applications, right? Then we're going to do a proof of concept and perform some reviews of the data in those applications. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're here for, is reviewing access. That's what our governance program is primarily about. It's how we're going to address our audit findings. We need to somehow handle the decisions that occur inside of the program or inside of the review. We need to handle those changes and apply them back to the system. And then lastly, we're ready for production. If we can do those 4 things, we should be good. This is when you realize the first problem, my friends. All right, so another mental experiment. I want you to sit back again. Imagine you are at home doing some yard work. It's a nice day out. It's not winter. It's not freezing or snowing. You're doing yard work. It's hot outside. You go inside to get a drink of water, right? This is a common thing. And the pitcher is empty, the water pitcher, your filter. The last person didn't fill it up. It's empty. So what do? You put water in it. And then what do? You wait. Because it takes time for a charcoal filter to filter water, right? This is a metaphor we're building. Charcoal filtering is a function of how much time water spends next to charcoal. That's why it takes forever. So you sit there and you wait for your water. Eventually it's filtered. You can get yourself a glass of water and drink. Water filters work slowly because that's just a requirement of how filters work. Similarly, reviews are not fast. Reviews are slow. Reviews take time for humans. If you're to consider a permission assigned to a single user, how long would it take you to make a good decision on if that single user should keep that access or not? Do you know who the user is? Do you know what their job function is? Do you know why they need the permission? Do you know what the permission is and what it grants access to? All of these things slow down reviews. On the flip side, the business is going to allocate a certain amount of time to performing reviews. It could be a month, it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks. Let's say it's 2 weeks, right? That's 80 hours of work time. And bit of mental math here. Let's say on average, it takes 10 seconds for you to review something as a reviewer. And if you've got 80 hours, that means you can review 28,800 items, almost 30,000 items. And I ask you, is that reasonable? Probably not. So you need an employee who doesn't get sick, never goes to the bathroom, is going to work all 80 hours of that time to go do that review work. Unless you've got Iron Man sitting next to you, or Iron Woman, it is very unlikely that you are going to be able to achieve that amount of reviewable items in that amount of time. So this is the number one problem, is you have more data than you expect, and the items to review inside the organization is enormous. So we need to pare back what we're reviewing, and we need to reduce the burden on reviewers. This is step one in how we scale. So we're going to put some rails or some limits or some guidance on what's appropriate to review. This is where policy starts to come in. Policy leads to process. And if we're starting to talk about process and policy, this is where we need the business to start stepping in, and we need the policy folks to start helping us create an appropriate policy process that talks about what is required to review. Is it just administrative privileges? Is it not built-in accounts? We can start to draw a scope around what the business is going to require. Similarly, other problems start cropping up. For instance, auditors ask questions like, well, how do you know that the review process finished? Or how do you know that what you've done is correct inside the environment? And in answering these questions, we're going to let the tool help us answer those for the auditor. We're going to generate artifacts from our tool set. That's going to be the resolution here. Another problem that you're going to be faced with is, how do we know which application we need to onboard next? Right? What's the order on which we want to bring these into the environment? This is a very important question to answer so that you have a pipeline of applications. So we took our project plan.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Before walking through the improved project plan, what does the highlights mean?
Excellent question. These highlights are things that we've just added. So this is to make it very clear what's new. This is the exact same project plan.
Okay.
We've just added a few other items here. So number one, there's policy and process, right? This is directly related to your success in developing a governance program. You have to have the policy folks at your organization involved. They have to be on board with helping you develop the appropriate process for what app owners need to be doing so that they can meet your standard, your security standard that you have in place. In fact, I will mention that you can start improving policy and process today before you even implement a tool. And then I might even go so far as to say you should have a clear and concise policy and set of processes in place now. So if you don't, that is something to get started with. If you're lacking in that area, now's the time to start. This is a dependency for successful implementation. You have to have acceptable, clear, and concise policy and process in place to support governance in order to be able to scale. Next item on this new list is the app train. App train is merely this concept that you have a good prioritized list of what you want to do next. Different businesses will have different ideas about what they want to do next. It might be the next most critical business app. It might be the most easiest app to onboard so that you can build trust inside the tool over time. There's different angles on choosing what you want next. Maybe you will come up with a set of criteria to judge which application should go next, but you need some mechanism and the business needs to trust it so that you always have what to work on next to onboard into your system. Next item underneath onboarding pilot applications, a big part of onboarding then is making sure that we are scoping what we're reviewing correctly, right? This is the 28,800 problem of we can't have our reviewers looking at everything. It is likely untenable. We have too much data. We've had in the last decade or two just a proliferation of systems inside our environments. There is too much data. We have to cut back and look at what's the most important stuff that we need to review in order to reduce risk inside our organization. And then lastly, talking about artifacts, the tool set, specifically the tool set from NetIQ OpenText, the identity governance software, has two key out-of-the-box reports that I think are game changers. Number one, there is the review details report. It is a result or a report that shows all of the decisions that were made for every review item in your review. It shows you who made the decision, if it was delegated, what time it happened, what the decision was, everything that you need to know from an audit standpoint. This is evidence that the review happened. This is beautiful for auditors. Separately, we have this closed loop verification. There's a feature in this tool where after a review, once somebody chooses to remove or revoke or take away access, a process will happen. We'll talk more about that process because that's pretty key with how we'll scale. After the removal process happens, the tool will go check to ensure that the access was actually removed. And evidence of that shows up in this closed loop verification report. This is where the tool is doing closed loop verification to ensure that the access has been removed, showing that those removals inside a report that you can give to auditors. This is an excellent way to give them evidence such that you will no longer have to do screenshots of group memberships and then show that to your auditors to prove that you actually updated the permissions correctly. If you hate doing screenshots, and if you're like me, you do, this artifact mechanism, this report will help avoid that in the future. It saves a tremendous amount of time. All right, so how do we get an even better program plan? This slide's talking a lot about the identity lifecycle. And at this point, as we've evolved our program plan up to now, that director of IT operations has probably realized that this project is never going to end. Let's just start calling it a program. So we'll do that. There may be some budget implications for programs versus projects for you. That may be interesting. Usually the project team at this point will start realizing that there are other ways to fine-tune the governance process. And notably, if you are setting up your service correctly, these are going to be things that the application owners are responsible for, right? This is not the IT group who's running the governance tool. This is work that's going to be spread out across application owners. Number one, are you reviewing the right stuff? Is the data that you're collecting from your application, right? We collect data into the IG tool, we turn it around through a web interface and present it back to the business. Is that data complete and accurate? We've already said that we're going to reduce what we're reviewing. We're not reviewing everything because some of that stuff everybody knows is there and we don't need to review it, right? So with this reduced amount of stuff that we're reviewing, which again is specified by those app owners, can they also perform a completeness and accuracy check to confirm that what we've collected is everything that needs to be reviewed? This is an important thing that auditors will ask for. Second question will be, are the right people reviewing your data? So how do you choose to make sure that authorized reviewers are reviewing the data that you have. That is an important thing, and there should be a process around this. And again, this will be decided by those app owners to make that choice to decide who is the right person to perform those reviews. Is it the supervisor? Is it application owner? Is it a permission owner? There's lots of choices there. Lastly, there's a thought about something I'm going to suggest to you. It's similar to the user lifecycle. I think of it as the permission lifecycle. Permission lifecycle is a similar parallel way to think about access inside an enterprise. The permission lifecycle, it begins when a new application is introduced to an enterprise. But it doesn't happen all that often, but it does occur. Permissions are introduced. They need to be introduced with a good name, a good description, and probably an owner, so that somebody over time can continue to update them. As that application use has changed over time, and as group memberships or however permissions are assigned are changed, those permissions need to be updated and maintained. Their descriptions need to ensure that they can be described back to the business adequately. And then at the end of life of an application, those permissions need to be removed as well. And so there's a permission lifecycle. If you think about this permission lifecycle, granting of permissions is just the flip side of from thinking about it from a user lifecycle. When users come on board, they change jobs, they get and lose access. It's the exact same thing. We think about permission lifecycle though, because this is something that you need to ensure your application owners are doing from a governance standpoint. So these are three things that your application owners need to be thinking about: the completeness and accuracy. Do you have authorized reviewers? And then am I keeping my permissions up to date?
So you talked about yellow being change. What does blue mean?
Yes, the blue on this better program plan, you'll note this is not the best. There's 4 iterations of this program plan. We're almost at the end here. The blue thing here is items that the IT group is responsible for. And what I want to point out in this list is there are very few things on this list that the IT group who's responsible for your governance implementation, for the tool implementation, very few things that they are doing. They get the software ready, right? They have some responsibility during onboarding of applications to make sure mapping of data from those applications, it comes in and it's consistent with IG standard data model, right? This is the trick. We map everything into a standard data model, and then we can present it back to the business in a way that they can understand. Other than those 2 things, everything else here is a business problem. And in fact, that is a key takeaway from this presentation is it is not an IT person responsibility to ensure governance rollout to the organization. It is a lot of teamwork. This is a huge change from previous type of projects that we may have done.
Well, and also your onboard has changed as well. So make sure to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So answers to the questions that we just posed about things that application owners need to do, that's what we've listed here. They need to be able to choose authorized reviewers, and they have to be enabled to do so through process. They have to have some type of completeness and accuracy check. These application owners should understand their data better than anyone. Therefore, they're the ones that are going to be responsible for ensuring that the right data is what's reviewed. And then lastly, they have to regularly update their permission information. So where am I going next? Let's see. All right. So if the point I want to make is if you are familiar with IDM projects, right, like NetIQ IAM, or there's other IDM projects out there which are in charge of collecting from an authoritative source and then synchronizing data down to other locations and provisioning accounts. IG has kind of evolved out of that technology from 15, 20 years ago. That was a technology, and those type of programs are ones where if you understand the business logic that's desired, as an IT person, you can go step away, configure that, and then deliver it back to the business, right? We can do it almost in a closet over here under the stairs. We don't need to be involved with the business as we come up with the solution, as long as we understand the business requirement. With an IG program, kind of is highlighted on this better program plan, all of these steps involve some other group inside the business. So it's key, it is key to integrate with them early on. All right, this is the second part. This is the last half of the program plan. Nothing's changed here, so we're not going to spend too much time on this. So how do we get to our final mature plan? We've identified that app owners have a lot of work to do in order to pass audits. Do you remember the VP of Information Technology in our recruits list before? So we've given her a pathway to succeed. We've got a program plan that involves a lot of different areas of the business. The tool is going to help with the heavy lift of the actual data review, right? We collect data, we standardize it, and then we display it back to the business. There's a lot of steps to get there. So the last questions that we've got are, can we ensure that end users have what they need in order to operate the tool, right? Do the app owners have what they need? Do the reviewers have what they need? Can we have application owners self-onboard to the tool? This is an interesting question, right? Can we remove the necessity of the IT group from owning the onboarding process? Can we give that to app owners? Do we have resources to build something that will help with that? And then lastly, can we orchestrate this process? Because as you've seen, there's a lot more than simply reviewing the data. There is like application governance step. Can we orchestrate some of these steps to help make it easier for the system owners as we move forward?
So here we are, mature. This is the final not phase, but level of program plan.
Yeah, this is as far as we're going to take it. I wouldn't say this is final, because as soon as you write on a document it's the final version, it's immediately not. But this is, we'll call this mature. And again, we've got our blue items here. These are IT things. We've added something here and on the next screen. What we've added here is user training. This is obviously training and communication are a huge part of your program. You are reaching out to folks inside the environment who are not IT people, who've probably not thought about access to applications in the past. So they're going to need to understand how the interface works. They need to understand something about the review process and what their responsibility is. This includes reviewers, application owners, and those sorts of folks. So if you have an enterprise training tool, you will want to engage with that team or set of people to help make sure that you have some type of training in place to ensure that your governance process will be successful. And so now, this is the final page then of our mature program plan. We've talked about responsibilities for the app owners. When we begin to think about if we can improve their experience, this is where orchestration comes in, right? And remember, our team has that one characteristic of being committed. And so if you're committed to your governance solution, you want to ensure that the service you're providing, users actually want to use it. So part of that involves making it easier to onboard and making it easier to go through the governance program. And because there's a lot of steps in that governance cycle, and your policy and process might dictate specific steps for your organization, what if we were able to orchestrate this through some type of workflow automation tool? And you may have an existing workflow or orchestration tool inside your organization. You may need to purchase one. Please talk more with OpenText folks about that if you're in need. But what if we could automate things like the completeness and accuracy check of data? Once we collect data into IG, if we could automate that completeness and accuracy based on what application owners said we needed to do, that would be awesome. What if we could automate updates to permissions in the permission lifecycle? That would be kind of awesome. These are things that you would do inside of an orchestration tool like a ServiceNow or a Remedy that might be able to handle a workflow. Or there's lots of other alternative enterprise workflow systems that are available. So if you imagine at the beginning of a governance cycle, right, because normally we handle governance in a time-based manner where either once a year or maybe every quarter there's a review. If you imagine at the beginning of that time cycle, if a app owner was presented with a list of items that they needed to complete, like a checklist of all these tasks, that would be ideal, right? Because they wouldn't have to remember to do everything. The system would consume and store the results of their work, so it was there for audit later. This is an ideal situation. This is what you're shooting for for really large scale deployment. Is some way to automate the workflow of doing the governance for your applications. What if this tool could in fact kick off collection of data for you? So once completeness and accuracy was completed, if we could refresh the data and then start the review for you, then you have no need for your IT folks manipulating and managing the IG system. And so this automation is possible with the NetIQ IG tool, because one beautiful thing, chef's kiss, one beautiful thing about this tool is that everything that is possible in the interface can be performed through an API call, which means with your orchestration tool or with a set of scripts or however you want to do it, you can orchestrate the IG tool to perform tasks like kicking off reviews, kicking off reports, collecting data, publishing data. You can do everything in an automated fashion. And that kind of, as an IT person, that probably has your brain tingling a little bit like, oh, I can actually get this tool to do stuff for me now. And that is exactly right. We can automate everything. So we talked about orchestration. Let's talk about scalability specifically. When we think about getting data into IG, right, we're moving huge amounts of data potentially, depending on the size of your organization, how many applications we're talking about, if it's hundreds or thousands. What we want to do is offload the task of responsibility of credentials and host information from the IG team. We really don't want that one team bottlenecking and managing a single set of connection information for every system that we need to connect from. We need to find a way to offload this. And this is where the integration manager came in, right? This is one of our recruits who manages some type of integration tool. If you are a large enterprise, it's very likely you have some type of integration tool or platform where you can connect to systems, collect data, transform it if necessary, and then feed it somewhere else. Similarly, OpenText has several solutions that can help here. If you're interested, please talk with them. But the idea is you will use a integration tool of some type. This could be, some enterprise service bus. It could be some type of web-based tool that will grab data on a regular basis. You'll find a mechanism to maintain connection information, probably through some table or registry of all your applications. You'll collect that data, present it back to IG, who consumes it. And then similarly, on the flip side, when it becomes time to talk about fulfillment or changes back to the environment, this integration tool can become very useful there too as well, right? If we offload fulfillment to that integration tool, it may be able to handle those connections to remove access, to grant access, etc. So from a fulfillment standpoint, let's dig a little bit deeper into that. This is a huge reason why you can scale this tool to hundreds of apps, to thousands of apps. The fulfillment, which this is the term we use to talk about how the IG product makes changes back in the environment. Fulfillment is key, and it's been architected in a very, very awesome way with the IG tool, where any change that is asked for inside the tool, and that could be from a review when somebody marks to remove something. IG also supports a request interface and a request mechanism where users can go in and request access to certain permissions. It supports a full, both a fairly simple and easy to use workflow mechanism, and there's also a more complex workflow engine built into the tool. So it supports workflow and a full request mechanism. The end result of that request mechanism would also be a fulfillment, right? So fulfillment could either be removing access, it could be removing accounts from systems, and the flip side, it can be provisioning new accounts or provisioning permissions to accounts in systems. And it uses all the same fulfillment mechanism. Fulfillment is configured per application. And for each application, there's a set of change types based on what you're doing. Are you adding a permission, or are you adding an account, or removing one of those things? And the way the system works is there's a few different patterns that you will follow. Number one, you can use ServiceNow or Remedy. Today, if you use tickets as your fulfillment mechanism, you can hook up IG directly to your ticket system, and it will create tickets for you. That's usually a good first phase. Second phase might be if you have an existing IDM infrastructure, that you can leverage that IDM infrastructure. IG can talk directly to the NetIQ IDM product and make changes to entitlements, and to roles and resources. If you happen to have a driver that handles those, then your automation's automatically done. It'll all happen through the driver. That's probably the simplest way to get fulfillment working. Lastly, the fulfillment system can talk directly to certain out-of-the-box systems, right? So as a result of, say, a review in Active Directory where I want to remove a handful of pieces of access, that direct fulfillment will go change the group membership straight in Active Directory for me immediately once the review is finished. And that is super powerful. So all these modes can be used as a reaction to a review or a request. And that flexibility, the ease of implementation of fulfillment is one reason why we're able to scale up very quickly. So here I want to touch on briefly what happens once you have performed reviews and as you begin to scale out and start onboarding applications. So phase one in almost every deployment is performing reviews, connect to systems, collect data, start performing reviews. Step two is you need to begin working with the business as part of this permission lifecycle to improve the metadata around permissions. This is where we improve who the owners are, or set or specify who the owners are, as well as improve the descriptions. It's important to describe permissions back to the business. So this step is key. This is also where we can start building roles to make it easier to manage and then review access. And then lastly, you begin to, once you've achieved roles and good permission metadata, this is where you start to enable access requests inside your organization. I'm going to talk about a couple other things that don't necessarily touch on the project plan, but these are key important things for you to know about. And these are questions that you will be thinking about with your program. And so really I'm seeding you with other things to think about. This is all important discussions that you need to have internally. So number one, who owns your standard, your security standard that you're following? Is there a team? I hope you have a team that is responsible for process and policy. Because you as an IG implementer need to be very clear about exactly what goals you're trying to meet that are inside that security standard. Who is doing those reviews? Who are the right reviewers? Do they have enough information? What are they reviewing? How often do they do it? What's the output of these reviews? Is it tickets? What artifacts do you need in order to meet your security standard? Another important question is, when you begin your program, are you going to implement all the features in the tool, or are you going to implement few but deploy them to your entire enterprise? So are you going wide or are you going deep, right? Because this is an intentional choice about how quickly you're going to be able to deploy. And there are a ton of features that the IG product supports that we haven't even talked about above and beyond reviews. So very briefly, obviously, we collect data, we can review data. There's the request and approval workflow mechanism. There's fulfillment. The tool can help you identify and analyze your existing data access footprint, and it can suggest roles to you in the environment. So it's an easy way to get to a more improved way to manage your access. The tool supports risk scoring. So based on an algorithm that you configure, you can assign numbers to individual users and to applications. So at a glance, you can get an idea of how risky they are. That is super powerful. The tool does separation of duties handling. The tool has what they call data policies, which essentially when you collect data, the policies will analyze what's coming in, and they're going to help ensure that your data is clean and everything matches what you expect. For instance, everybody has an email address. And then lastly, because this is all backed by a database, one of the product features is called Governance Insights. And this lets you query for just about anything that you can think of inside the tool. And so that lets you very quickly answer questions like, hey, what did this guy have access to? Because his account just got attacked. So that's very useful. So another key thing you must think about, number one, is your program working? So here's a smattering of some ideas about things that you might want to measure that are going to help indicate if your program is doing well. Are you helping to increase the security footprint of your enterprise? Are you deploying fast enough? Are you making it easier to manage access and applications inside your environment? Here's an example of what a dashboard inside the tool looks like, right? We've got a number of different widgets that are showing us important, valuable information. This is something that you do want to show your leadership and folks that handle budget, right? An important aspect of this program is to ensure to the people who are paying for it, hey, look, you're getting something from this money. We're making changes here. Sometimes that gets lost in translation in security programs or in governance programs. So it's important to get in front of leadership with metrics that show them, hey, look, we're actually affecting change. This is, we're making positive impact on the business. This is an example of an onboarding workflow. This onboarding workflow takes an application from the beginning. It puts them through several steps. It's not important, the individual steps here. What's important is you realize there is going to be a process involved with onboarding your applications. And it's super important that you keep that in mind and you customize this for your organization. And getting to a detailed level of onboarding so that you can make estimates on what it'll take. You can understand where the hurdles are. That's a pretty important aspect of a successful program. We've talked about training. Briefly, we had that on our program plan. And again, just to reiterate, we're going to need to develop training for reviewers, for review owners, any support personnel, your implementation team. All these different facets of your organization need to be able to use the tool that you've developed and understand the policy and the process that gets them there so that they can understand what they're achieving. So if we were to follow the program plan that we had outlined, what do we get? I think the end result is we're at the top of the mountain. We have audit artifacts. We've improved policy and process documentation. That's a key outcome of the program, right? It was unclear before. Now everybody understands exactly what they need to do. We've ensured fulfillment is being completed. We've got that closed loop verification report. This proves to an auditor, hey, we're actually making changes back to the business when we perform a review. Hopefully we pass audits now. The business is able to continue doing work, right? They're passing their audits. They have reduced the burden of reviewers. We've improved security footprint. We won't lose important contracts. And then we have increased insurance against security events from happening, right? Because we're reducing access where it's not necessary in the business. So I hope I have provided here an example of what good looks like from a project plan standpoint. If you can envision a large scale enterprise deployment, then you can begin to deploy it in your organization. You can begin to implement. The NetIQ IG software helps you overcome enormous hurdles. They help make possible what was previously impossible. If you need any assistance in implementation, I encourage you to reach out to me. I work for a company called TriVir, and we can help you with the initial heavy lift of that deployment. So here's a list of things that you can do that'll help make you successful. Are there any questions?
Yeah, we got a few. If you haven't submitted your question yet, go ahead. So let me start off with what we have here. I'm responsible for technology, risk management, and governance. I do partner with internal legal affairs and the data privacy steering committee, audit, and work across technology teams. With that, you mentioned that additional partnerships are required for governance. What other areas or departments do you recommend?
I would definitely talk to internal compliance folks. Anybody who's been helping the application team ensure that they meet requirements of security standards, because that's the team who is ultimately they're the ones who are getting the biggest benefit, other than the business, from what a good IG program is going to deliver to the business. Application owners, that's another really important group to talk to, so that you don't want to surprise people with, hey, by the way, we're going to start doing more governance stuff and we're going to be giving you a bunch of tasks. They need to feel supported. They need buy-in. They are stakeholders of the project. I think the leadership team all the way up through CTO and then further, it's important to be communicating with them in terms of, hey, these are what our goals are. Here's some metrics showing how well we're doing. Here's what we're doing to improve those metrics over time. If you can find right metrics that resonate with the leadership team, and then work to find ways to improve those, I think that goes a long way towards towards success with a program. I think there's other technical groups that you can talk with in order to help with orchestration of, when we start talking about how do we get to scale with an IG program. Same thing with an integration team that might be able to touch lots of applications and bring more data into the governance tool. So that's a smattering of groups that might help.
Great. Okay. Next question. What is the best platform to install the infrastructure?
That is a trick question. This depends entirely on your organization. And let me explain. And platform can mean a lot of things. That could mean what OS do we want to deploy on? I'm a fan of deploying it on something Linuxy. And so take your pick there. This could mean what backend do we want to use? They support Postgres, Oracle, and SQL Server. I've seen implementations of all three. The real answer for what's best depends on what is your organization best prepared to support. And keep in mind, IG is going to install on this back end, but it's up to your organization to maintain that back end, right? There's maintenance stuff that happens through the tool, but things like backups or things like ensuring that disk throughput is acceptable and that performance is acceptable, that's on the database folks. So you need to make sure that and by all means have those teams fight with each other to the death until they understand who's the most powerful inside your organization. But go with who can scale quickly, who has the disk throughput to make performance work, who can expand when needed. Those types of things are going to lead you towards the correct answer there. Hopefully that addressed the question.
Well, that's good advice, and you're among friends, Jim. We're not trying to trick you or anything like that.
I say it's a trick question because you think that the vendor would have a good suggestion on like, oh, well, you want to install it like this. That's the best way to get it. And there's so many variables inside infrastructure that that is not actually the question. The question is, what can the business do best to support the tool?
Yep. Related, I think this is kind of related. Can this be deployed via SaaS or as a managed service?
There is a SaaS offering, and the SaaS offering is actually quite exciting with the NetIQ IG product because any of the updates that they make to the product are deployed to SaaS first, and it's usually 3 to 6 months later that those updates make it to the on-prem version. So SaaS is entirely in the cloud. I won't say it's a managed service. It's managed for you. The infrastructure, it's still up to your folks to connect to the service, configure connectors, etc. They use a bridge mechanism where you'll have an on-site device that everything is funneled through. It's pretty slick as a SaaS offering. But there is also an on-prem offering if you would prefer that as well.
Okay. If we begin to onboard apps for reviews, does that prevent us from deploying other features later, like risk scoring or segregation of duties?
There are no dependencies between some of those advanced features and performing reviews up front. So that question about breadth versus depth, you don't need to choose to go deep immediately. And that doesn't hinder you later from deploying some of those features. You will obviously go back to some applications that you've already onboarded. For instance, if you want to introduce risk scoring, you will need to update some configuration, but it's not going to hinder you from doing that in the future if you don't start with those in mind. So it's perfectly valid to start a program using that phased approach we outlined, where first you collect data and do reviews, then you kind of curate your permission information so that you can describe it back to the business. And then lastly, you can set up you can set up access requests, as well as the other feature sets like risk scoring, role mining, separation of duties, those type of things. If you need those features sooner, then you are free to obviously implement those when you need them, but it won't hinder you from a deployment.
Okay, so you talked earlier about automation, so this one's, I think, related. Can you automate some of the testing of the solution, any integration with DevOps process or teams?
Absolutely. Because the interface is entirely API driven, that means we can automate all of the interface, or all of using the tool. So there's a couple areas that I'll talk about. Number one is, I should tell you, at TriVir, we have a testing solution that we've open sourced called IDM Unit. And we've used IDM Unit for years with IDM projects. And this tool, will insert things like HR data. They'll watch it synchronize. We'll confirm all the synchronization has happened and all the business rules have been met in the outcome of that test. We've actually applied IDM Unit to IG such that we can set up an account in a system. We can collect that data into IG, and then we can confirm any transforms that were necessary to get the data into a standard format have all been applied and the data looks good. And so we use that in order to ensure that our applications are all working, we're collecting data appropriately, everything's connected, it's a good end-to-end test. And this is the type of thing that we can do, because it's set up in a testing framework, an IG unit, we can do it at the touch of a button.
Right.
Similarly, so that's more on the testing side. From an orchestration standpoint, we've got a client that has hundreds of databases, and managing the configuration of all of those was it was something that I didn't want to have to click around and enter in 200 databases, let's say. So something that we've done there is we have set up we have a register of applications that we read in through some automation scripts. And as a result of seeing them in this register, we know, we need to ensure that we've got configuration inside of IG. And so we'll go check. And if it's missing, we'll go add configuration for applications and for subsequent connectors and collectors for data. So we've automated the creation and management of our IG infrastructure through some automation scripts through the API.
Okay. Can we dynamically kick off a review when a user terminates or transfers?
Yes. I think I briefly mentioned time-based reviews previously. A time-based review is the type of thing where you do it every 6 months or once a year. It's periodic. It's meant to catch things that your normal process has missed, right? Like everybody has a termination process. Well, sometimes we forget, or somebody forgot to delete the account, or it was missed for whatever reason. A time-based process is meant as a stopgap. It is reducing the risk of, oops, we missed a process. A event-based review is something that's kicked off as a point in time. So one of the features of the IG tool is it can react to changes in your authoritative data source rather quickly. What this means is if you have a HR system, say, that creates a terminated user, like the employee status has changed, or what if their job title has changed? Let's say somebody moved into a different department. Your department code is now different. Once IG learns about this change, we can kick off a just-in-time review for that user, and we can assign it to, say, their supervisor. And so this is an awesome way at the time of change to handle review and ensure that the right access is in place at the right time. And so these event-based triggers, they put some extra strain on an IG system, to be honest, because you need to ensure that you're collecting enough data from these important sources regularly so that when any of these just-in-time reviews happens, they're able to show the right actual, up-to-date data to a supervisor or to a manager. But if you can implement those event-based reviews, now you can be fairly certain that your process for terminations or job changes for transfers is being followed, because you have a system now in place to ensure that with this web-based mechanism, you're generating metrics on it. You can ensure that everybody's following the process.
Cool. Okay. Can you talk about human hours saved versus human hours spent on your IGA rollouts? Should we be looking for a traditional ROI, or should this be looked at as a longer-term risk management investment?
In my experience, I'll give you two examples. In my experience, there's a huge short-term return, as well as that just is compounded over time. So we had one client who implemented IG against two of their financial systems. They had two instances of Oracle e-business suite, right? And they were a publicly traded SOX company, or they adhered to Sarbanes-Oxley. So they had to ensure that there was no fraud in their system. So we connected IG to their EBS systems. After the first review was complete, they had removed 15% of the access that was in place in their financial system. That kind of that shook me, to be honest. I was like, whoa, that's crazy. That's a lot of inappropriate access. And supposedly they had been doing reviews before this, right? So you're kind of thinking like, wow, that's a lot of stuff that shouldn't be there that they're taking away. So that was the first time my socks were blown off. I had to buy new socks. 6 months later, they did another review, and gosh darn it, my socks were blown off again. The amount of change in their system was again 15%. And I will tell you again, 6 months later, they did another review. It was still 15% of change of access that they removed. And what I learned from this is there's constant churn in the system. Some organizations are not going to be able to successfully follow whatever their normal day-to-day process is. They need a point-and-check system to help ensure that access has been removed. In my mind, this is an immediate return on investment because this is assurance, not just to your public stakeholders who need to be sure that you're not able to commit fraud inside your organization, but also internally for your security folks who now know, like, okay, well, at least we got rid of that for 15% of people that shouldn't have had that access. So there's a huge return initially from that aspect, from a security standpoint. Similarly, we've got a customer who deployed quite a lot, hundreds of applications. They calculated that the amount of time savings from the tool collecting data, transforming that, and performing reviews back, giving a web-based review back to the business, they figured that saves something around, I think it was 2,600 man hours. And they were doing this review twice a year, and it turned out to be something like $250,000 that they saved now. They've changed to every year reviews, but that's just a tremendous amount of savings, just in time spent on not having to collect data. So yeah, the automation is real. It can definitely save a huge amount of time, and that translates into people's hours. Those people that were doing that work, they are, doing cartwheels and somersaults because they have time to do more important stuff now than just manage the collection of data and then presenting it back to the business. So This is exactly the heavy lift that this tool was meant for, the NetIQ IG platform, and it very much succeeded in that manner.
Okay, we got 1 minute to top the hour, so this is going to be a quick answer here. How does IG leverage an existing IDM deployment?
If an existing IDM, right, the existing IDM tool is meant to pull from an authoritative source, synchronize and provision data out. If you have existing drivers that A, use entitlements, or B, use roles and resources, IG can talk to IDM and collect that information about that target system directly from IDM. And you can do reviews on that data. And subsequently, if anyone decides to revoke that information, IG will talk straight through user app or straight to eDirectory to make the changes to entitlements or to roles and resources, which then in turn are handled by the driver. And so it's a very quick way. If you've already instrumented a driver, you can use IG to go straight in, consume that data, and then leverage that IDM investment over time. So it's awesome. In my mind, this makes this product the best in the market in terms of capability for provisioning and deprovisioning. Because not only do you have these direct fulfillers that you can use out of the box, but you can also integrate with what I think is the world's best identity management platform, the NetIQ IAM solution. So you can do anything.
Thanks. Awesome, Jim. So we're top of the hour, 10 o'clock. Or I guess it depends on mountain time anyway. So thanks so much for your time, Jim. I really appreciate it. And folks, if you haven't already, please note Jim's contact info, and let's keep in touch.